planet was unlike anything he had ever seen. As a human soldier, Jake had visited many alien worlds, but none had captivated him like this one. The skies were a deep shade of violet, with 2 moons hanging low in the sky. Their soft light bathed the entire landscape in a mystical glow. It was quiet, too quiet. Only the occasional rustle of alien trees disturbed the peace. Jake had been sent on a mission to this remote planet, a place that had been recently discovered by Earth's explorers. The locals, strange and beautiful beings with shimmering skin, in graceful movements, welcomed him warmly. However, it was not the locals who caught his attention that Nightit was the princess. He first saw her standing by a large rock formation, her back to him. The sight of her, bathed in the light of the twin moons, took his breath away. Her skin glowed faintly under the starlight, and her long silver hair flowed in the gentle breeze. Jake hesitated, unsure whether he should approach her. But something in his heart told him this was a moment he couldn't ignore. As he stepped closer, she turned to face him. Her eyes were a deep shade of blue, reflecting the moons above. Her expression was calm, but there was a spark of curiosity in her gaze. It was as if she had been waiting for him. "You're human," she said in a soft voice, almost as if she were speaking to herself. Jake nodded. "I am, and you? You're the princess, aren't you?" She smiled, a knowing smile that made Jake's heart race. "Yes, I'm Lyra, daughter of the king. And you, ... you're far from home, aren't you?" "Far, yes," Jake replied, still trying to understand the beauty of the moment. "I've been sent to learn about your planet, but I didn't expect ... this." She stepped closer to him, her movements fluid and graceful. "This world has many secrets," Lyra said, her voice almost a whisper. "But sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that change everything." Before Jake could respond, she closed the gap between them and placed her hand gently on his chest. The touch was electric, sending a shock through his body. Then, without warning, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. Jake was stunned. It was soft and warm, and for a moment the world around him seemed to disappear. The only thing that mattered was Lyra and the kiss they were sharing under the alien moons. It was as if time had slowed down, and for a brief moment he felt a connection so deep, almost felt like they had known each other for lifetimes, but just as quickly as it had begun, the kiss ended. Lyra pulled back, her eyes searching his face for any reaction. Jake stood there, frozen, his mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. Before he could find the right words, a loud voice broke the silence. "Lyra." They both turned, to see a tall, imposing figure striding toward them. He wore the robes of a royal, and his face was stern, carved from stone. It was Lyra's father, the king. His gaze was cold as he looked at Jake, then at his daughter. "What is this?" he demanded. Lyra stepped back, her expression changing from warmth to something guarded. "Father, I know," the king interrupted, his voice booming with authority. "I warned you about humans. They are not to be trusted. And yet you," he pointed at Jake with a sharp finger, "you come here? And you think you can just kiss my daughter as if you have any right to, knee." Of his guards and gave a sharp command, "Take him to the training camp. Let him see what it truly means to be tested." The guards moved quickly, seizing Jake's arms and escorting him away. Jake struggled to make sense of the situation. His heart still pounded from the kiss, and now his thoughts were clouded with confusion and frustration. What had just happened? How had everything turned so wrong so fast? Lyra's voice echoed in the distance as she called out to him, but the guards silenced her. Jake could only look back at her once more, meeting her gaze as they took him away. The king had spoken. Jake would have to prove himself whether he was ready or not. Jake felt the harsh grip of the alien soldiers as they dragged him through the dense alien forest. Far from the beautiful moonlit fields where he had met Lyra, his heart still raced. From the kiss? But that was the last thing on his mind now. The king had made it clear Jake wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was a challenge, a test that had to be passed. The soldiers were rough, their alien hands strong and unyielding as they shoved Jake forward. He stumbled but quickly regained. His balance? There was no point in resisting. All he could do now was see where this would lead him. His mission had been simple: learn about the alien culture, be an observer. But now everything had changed. The camp was located deep in the heart of the planet, a place far from the peaceful landscape he had first seen. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and the sound of clanging weapons. A military base, far more intense than any human boot camp Jake had ever heard of. As they reached the entrance, Jake was pushed into a large open courtyard. He could see rows of alien soldiers training, each one stronger, faster, and more intimidating than he could have imagined. His stomach twisted with fear, but he quickly swallowed it down. He wasn't here to fail. The leader of the camp, a large, imposing alien with 4 arms and sharp, glowing red eyes, stood in front of Jake. He was taller than any human Jake had ever met, and his presence commanded immediate respect. "You are human," the leader said, his voice deep and guttural. "That makes you weak. But today, you begin your training. Today, you will learn what it means to be strong." Jake stood tall, despite the overwhelming fear. "I'm ready," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Couldn't show weakness. "Not now," the leader smirked. "We'll see about that." Without further warning, the training began. Jake was forced to run laps around the camp, carrying heavy weights that tested his strength and stamina. The alien soldiers watched, many of them laughing at him, mocking his human limitations. They were faster, stronger, more agile. Jake was sweating within minutes, his legs burning with each step, but he didn't stop. Hours passed and Jake was put through a series of brutal exercises. He practiced combat skills against alien warriors, sparring with them until he could hardly stand. His body was bruised and sore, but still, he kept going. The alien soldiers would strike him down with ease, but Jake always stood back up, determined not to let them break him. At one point, Jake was thrown into a pit with another alien, a beast-like soldier who towered over him. The creature growled, its sharp claws glistening in the dim light. The fight was more brutal than anything Jake had ever experienced. It moved with an unpredictable speed, striking hard and fast. Jake barely dodged the creature's first attack, rolling to the side just in time to avoid its claws. His heart raced and panic began to set in. But then, something inside him clicked. He couldn't let fear control him. He had to fight, not just for his survival, but for the chance to prove he was worthy of being near Lyra. With a deep breath, Jake shifted his stance, focusing on the creature's movements. It lunged again, but this time, Jake was ready. He sidestepped, grabbing the creature's arm and using its momentum to slam it into the ground. It howled in pain, but Jake didn't let up. He punched it hard in the face, feeling the satisfying crunch of its jaw beneath his fist. The alien leader watched from the sidelines, his eyes narrowing. Jake had held his own. The fight was far from over, but Jake had gained something that day. Respect. From the soldiers, from the leader, and perhaps even from himself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Jake sat down on a bench to catch his breath. His body ached, his muscles sore and exhausted. But in that moment, he felt stronger than ever before. He wasn't just some human anymore. He was becoming a soldier. Later that evening, after his training had ended, Jake was given a small meal. It wasn't much, just some kind of protein paste, but it was enough to sustain him. He ate in silence, his mind focused on the challenges ahead. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear: this wasn't the life he had signed up for. As he finished his meal, he caught sight of someone standing at the edge of the camp. It was Lyra. She had snuck in, her presence barely noticeable in the shadows. She looked at him with concern, her eyes searching his face for any sign of injury. Jake stood up slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He couldn't hide his exhaustion, but he didn't want her to worry. "How's the training?" Lyra asked softly, stepping closer. "It's harder than I thought," Jake admitted, his voice tired but determined. "But I'll get through it. I have to." Lyra nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I knew you would, my father. He may not understand, but I do." Jake gave her a tired grin. "Thanks for believing in me." I'll prove him wrong. I'll prove everyone wrong, she placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle and comforting. I believe in you, Jake. Just don't forget why you're here. He nodded, looking into her eyes. I won't forget. I'm doing this for you, ... for us. Lyra's smile grew, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Just be careful. My father is watching you, and he won't make this easy. Jake's heart tightened. He knew the king's expectations were high, and the tests would only get harder. But he couldn't back down now, not after everything. As Lyra turned to leave, Jake watched her go, his heart heavy with the weight of the challenge ahead. But deep inside, he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't stop fighting. It's not until he earned the right to stand by her side. The days blurred together in a haze of pain, sweat, and exhaustion. Jake had been it. The alien boot camp for what felt like weeks now. Each day was harder than the last, and the challenges never seemed to end. His body had become shed. During one of the morning runs, Jake found himself struggling to keep up with the others. Other soldiers were faster, more agile, and built to endure. Sweat streamed down his face as his legs burned, but he refused to fall behind. He wasn't about to let anyone think he was a failure. As he pushed through the pain, he noticed a pair of eyes watching him from the sidelines. It was one of the other recruits, a tall, lithe alien with dark skin and sharp features. She had been quiet throughout the entire training, not once mocking Jake like the others. She seemed different, calm, and collected in a way that made her stand out from the rest. During their break, the alien woman approached him. Her steps were light, and she moved with a grace that spoke of years of training. She didn't look like the others, who were quick to make fun of the human in their midst. Instead, she seemed curious. She gave him a nod, as if acknowledging his determination. You're not like the others, she said in a soft, almost melodic voice. Jake wiped his brow with the back of his hand and gave her a tired smile. I guess I'm just stubborn, he replied. She smiled faintly. Stubbornness is a good trait, but it can also get you hurt. I've been hurt already, Jake said, his voice low. But that's not going to stop me. The woman nodded, her eyes studying him closely. I know. You don't give up. I've been watching you. You might be human, but you have something we don't see often here. Jake frowned, confused. What's that? Heart, she said simply. You're not the strongest or the fastest, but you have heart. Keep going, even when they try to break you. Jake didn't know what to say to that. He had never really thought of it that way. To him, it wasn't about heart, it was about survival. But maybe there was something to what she was saying. Who are you? He asked. The alien woman smiled slightly. My name is Kayla. I'm from the Rolnorian tribe. I've been here for a while, but I don't fit in with the others. They don't understand me, and I don't understand them. Jake raised an eyebrow. I thought you were supposed to be just like them. I was, she said, her voice quieter now. I don't believe in the same things they do. I don't think strength comes from beating others down. I think it comes from knowing when to stand up for yourself and when to help others. Jake felt a spark of understanding. That sounds like what I've been trying to do. I'm not trying to beat anyone. I just want to show that humans aren't weak. Kayla gave him a nod. That's what makes you different. You're not here to prove you're stronger than everyone else. You're here to prove you can stand beside us as equals. For the first time since he had arrived, Jake felt like he wasn't alone in this. Kayla had shown him that it wasn't about matching the aliens in strength or speed. It was about something more, something deeper. It was about showing that he could be just as worthy as them in his own way. Over the next few days, Kayla became Jake's quiet ally. She trained with him during the breaks, helping him with techniques that he struggled with. She never mocked him, never made him feel weak. Instead, she encouraged him, showing him the ways that his human adaptability could be used to his advantage. Whether it was learning how to move quickly in tight spaces or using his instincts to predict an opponent's next move, Kayla taught him the skills he needed to improve. The other recruits began to notice the change. At first, they scoffed, thinking that Kayla was wasting her time on the human. But as Jake's skills improved, their mockery began to fade. Slowly, he started earning their respect. One afternoon, the alien leader, the same one who had been so harsh on Jake in the beginning, called for a training exercise. This time, Jake was paired with one of the toughest soldiers in the campa. Massive alien with thick armor-like skin and an unshakable attitude. The soldiers sneered as they faced off, clearly thinking that it would be an easy match. Jake didn't feel confident, but Kella's words echoed in his mind. It's not about strength. It's about heart. He squared his shoulders, focusing on his opponent's movements. The fight was intense. The massive soldier threw punches that could knock a boulder over, but Jake was faster. He dodged, using his smaller size to his advantage. The soldier grew frustrated, throwing everything he had at Jake, but Jake, drawing on his growing experience, waited for the perfect moment. With a quick move, Jake landed a solid strike, knocking the soldier off balance. The alien grunted, clearly shocked, and Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He quickly moved in, using a technique Kayla had shown him, swift and precise. When the fight was over, the massive alien was on the ground, breathing heavily. Jake stood over him, chest heaving. It wasn't a win he had expected, but it was one he had earned. The alien leader, who had been watching from the sidelines, walked over to him. His stern face softened, just slightly. "You've earned some respect today, human," he said, his voice deep. "You might just make it here." After all, Jake felt a surge of pride. It wasn't the approval he had wanted from the king, but it was a start. More importantly, it was a sign that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as out of place here as he had once thought. As the day ended and Jake returned to his barracks, he couldn't help but think of Lyra. Her father's disapproval still weighed heavily on him, but he was beginning to understand that this was more than just about proving himself to her father. It was about proving to himself that he was worthy of being here, worthy of standing beside her, and with Kella's help. Jake felt ready to face whatever came next. The camp had become a place of routine. The days blurred together endless training, harsh drills, and a sense of isolation that weighed heavily on Jake's shoulders. He had been there for weeks now, far from home. The challenge of proving himself to Lyra's father still hung over him like a dark cloud. Jake had made progress. Yes. He had improved his combat skills and earned some measure of respect from the other soldiers. But the king's words echoed in his mind every day. Prove yourself, or you'll never be good enough. And now, as Jake stood on the edge of the training field, watching the sun dip behind the alien mountains, he knew he was running out of time. The drills had grown harder with each passing week. Today they were training in small group tactics. Jake had been paired with some of the strongest soldiers in the camp, each one eager to show off their skills. They were not as forgiving as Kayla, and they didn't see the potential Jake had discovered within himself. To them, he was still just the weak human who didn't belong. Watch and learn, human. One of the soldiers sneered as he readied himself for the drill. Jake stood tall, determined not to let the insults affect him. He had learned not to let them get to him, but it was hard to ignore their mocking tone. It wasn't just about the physical challenges anymore. It was about showing them all that humans could be just as strong and capable as the other species in the galaxy. As the drill began, Jake quickly found himself struggling to keep up with, though the drill ended with Jake failing to complete a critical part of the exercise. The soldiers finished their task with ease, leaving Jake alone, standing in the center of the field, his heart pounding in his chest. He had let them down. More importantly, he had let himself down. As he walked back to the barracks, his mind was a swirl of frustration and doubt. He had been pushing himself harder every day, but it never seemed to be enough. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. Maybe he'd never be good enough to stand beside Lyra to prove that humans had a place among the stars. He barely noticed when Kayla approached him. She had been watching from a distance, her sharp eyes catching every moment of his failure. "Jake," she said softly, her voice cutting through the fog of his thoughts. He didn't look up at first. He didn't want to. He didn't want to hear any more encouragement, not today. "I messed up," he muttered, staring down at his boots. "I'm never going to be good enough, no matter how hard I try." Kayla placed a hand on his shoulder, gently lifting his chin to meet her gaze. "Can't let one mistake define you. We all fail. But the important thing is how you rise after a fall." Jake swallowed hard. "It's different for me. They all look at me like I don't belong. Like I'm some kind of weakling. You're not weak, Kayla said firmly. I've seen you. I've seen your heart. You may not be the strongest, but you have something none of them have. You have the will to keep going even when everyone else gives up. That's strength. Looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of pity or doubt. But there was none. Her eyes were steady, full of conviction. She wasn't just saying it to make him feel better. She truly believed in him. But it's not enough, Jake said quietly. I'm just a human, and humans don't belong here, not with the rest of you. Kayla shook her head. Don't. Ever think that? You have the same right to be here as anyone else? If you keep fighting, you'll prove it to everyone. Her words struck a chord deep within him. He wasn't here just to survive. He wasn't here just to make it through the training. He was here to prove that humanity was capable of more. He had to do it for himself. For Lyra, and for every human who had ever been looked down upon by others. Before he could respond, the camp's commander appeared, his towering form casting a long shadow over them. His piercing eyes flicked from Kayla to Jake, and for a moment, Jake felt that familiar sense of tension, the feeling of being watched, judged. The king wants to see you human, the commander said gruffly. Now, Jake's stomach dropped. He knew what this meant. The king had watched his failure during the drill. He was being summoned to face the consequences. Kayla squeezed Jake's arm before stepping back. Whatever happens, don't forget who you are, she whispered, her voice steady and comforting. You are more than what they think of you.
I wish.
A final nod, Jake walked toward the commander's office. His heart was heavy with uncertainty, but Kayla's words gave him the strength he needed. He wasn't going to let this be the end. He was going to fight no matter what. When he reached the king's office, the heavy doors swung open, revealing the stern figure of Lyra's father sitting at his desk. His cold, piercing gaze locked onto Jake's as he entered the room. I've been watching you, human, the king said, his voice low and menacing, and I'm not impressed. Jake stood tall, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm doing my best. The king's lips curled into a slight, mocking smile. Best isn't good enough. Jake's heart sank. He had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. You're a disgrace to your people, the king continued, his tone harsh. You failed, and you will continue to fail. Unless... Unless what? Jake asked, his voice tight with both fear and defiance. Unless you prove to me that you're worthy of being here. I'll give you one last chance, the king said, his eyes glinting with something that made Jake uneasy. Another test, final trial. Fail this, and you will leave. Jake's pulse quickened. This was at the moment that would decide his future. I won't fail, Jake said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. The king leaned back in his chair, studying him with a calculating gaze. We'll see. Jake stood in front of the king, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been called into the king's chambers after his failure during the last training exercise. The king's cold gaze burned into him, making his skin crawl. Last chance has arrived, human, the king said, his voice as hard as stone. I'm sending you on a mission, one that will test everything you've learned here. Fail, and you will never set foot in this camp again. Succeed, ... And perhaps I will reconsider my opinion of you. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. The mission would determine whether or not he had any place among the aliens. He couldn't fail. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. The king gestured toward a map on the wall, a map of a distant planet in the galaxy. It was marked with red, indicating areas of danger. Your task is simple. Infiltrate the enemy base on this planet. Gather information in return. Do not engage the enemy unless necessary. The king nodded, his expression unreadable. You'll be accompanied by a team of elite soldiers. They will help you. But do not expect any favors. This mission is yours to complete. And do not forget human. Failure is not an option. With those words, Jake was dismissed. Jake didn't have much time to prepare. Was quickly given his gear and sent off to meet his team. Soldiers who would accompany him were some of the toughest, most experienced warriors in the camp. They didn't look at him with disdain anymore, but the respect was only surface deep. Jake knew that they still didn't fully believe in him. They saw him as an outsider, a human who had no business being involved in a mission of this importance. As they boarded the transport ship, the silence was thick. Jake tried to make himself useful by double-checking the weapons and equipment, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. He hadn't seen her since the last time they spoke. He missed her more than he wanted to admit. Would she still believe in him when he returned? Or would her father's harsh judgment cause a permanent rift between them? The trip to the enemy planet took several hours. The cold, empty space outside the ship seemed endless, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. He'd come a long way from that first meeting with Lyra under the alien moons, but now everything seemed uncertain. The king had made it clear that his survival depended on the success of this mission, and if he failed, it might be the end of his dreams of standing beside Lyra. When the ship finally touched down on the enemy planet, Jake could feel the weight of the mission pressing on his chest. The ground was rocky and barren, the air thick with dust. The enemy base was located in a canyon, hidden from plain sight. Jake's team gathered around, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. "Stay alert," one of the soldiers, a tall alien with sharp blue eyes, whispered. "We don't know what we're walking into." Jake nodded, tightening his grip on his weapon. He had no intention of letting his guard down. This mission was his opportunity to prove himself, not just to the king, but to everyone who had doubted him. They moved quickly and quietly, following the terrain through narrow passages that led them deeper into the canyon. As they neared the enemy base, Jake's heart raced. The base was heavily guarded, with armed soldiers patrolling the perimeter. The mission was supposed to be about gathering intel, but Jake knew it would be hard to avoid conflict. "Stay low," one of the soldiers ordered. "We move in under the cover of darkness." As night fell, the team split up into smaller groups. Jake found himself paired with Kayla, the alien who had helped him train and believed in him from the beginning. They moved silently through the shadows, using the cover of rocks and rubble to remain unseen. "This is it," Kayla whispered. "Stay focused, Jake. We've trained for this." Jake nodded, feeling a surge of determination. This wasn't just about completing a mission. This was about proving that he could stand beside her, that he could stand with all of them, no matter their doubts. As they approached the enemy base, Jake felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The first time since arriving on this planet, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ready to prove to everyone that he wasn't weak. He wasn't just a human in an alien world. He was a soldier, just like them. They reached the outer walls of the base, where a few guards stood watch. Kayla motioned for Jake to follow her as she crept toward the wall. Using a small handheld device, she disabled the security system, allowing them to slip inside undetected. Inside the base was dark and cold, its walls lined with strange machinery. Jake's eyes darted around, trying to absorb every detail. They had no idea what kind of information they were supposed to retrieve, but Jake trusted Kayla. She was the expert here. They moved quickly through the base, avoiding guards and using the shadows to their advantage. After a tense few minutes, they reached the main control room. Kayla plugged into a console and began downloading the data they needed. "This won't take long," she whispered. "Stay on guard." Jake stood by the door, scanning the room. For any signs of movement, the quiet hum of the base filled the air, but everything seemed still. Too still. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared throughout the base. Red lights flashed, casting an eerie glow on the walls. Jake's heart raced. They had been spotted. "Time to go," Kayla shouted, yanking the device from the console. Jake didn't hesitate.
Ah!
They had what they came for. Now all that mattered was getting out alive. They turned to make their escape, but as they did, they were confronted by a squad of enemy soldiers. Ouch. Jake's heart pounded in his chest.
This was it.
The moment he had been training for. Kella's eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was no fear in her gaze. Only trust. "Fight together," she said. Jake nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. It was time to prove that he was more than just a human. He was a soldier. The blaring alarms echoed through the enemy base, and Jake's heart pounded in his chest. They had only moments before the entire base would be alerted to their presence. He and Kayla had successfully retrieved the intel, but escaping with it now felt like an impossible task. The base was swarming with enemy soldiers, and they had no choice but to fight their way out. Kayla's eyes were sharp as she scanned the corridor, her every movement precise. "We need to get to the extraction point. Follow me," she said, her voice steady, despite the chaos around them. Jake nodded, trying to ignore the fear that crept up his spine. They had been training for moments like this, but nothing could fully prepare him for the danger of a real battle. He had faced challenges before, but this was different. His life and the success of the mission depended on his ability to stay calm and focused as they sprinted down the hallway. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Jake's breath quickened, and his palms began to sweat. He was no longer just a human in a training camp. He was in the thick of a battle. It was real now. Everything he had worked for was about to be tested. "Stay close," Kayla urged, her voice cutting through the tension. "We can't afford to get separated." Jake followed her lead, every step calculated as they weaved through the base. His heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside. He had been through worse before. The soldiers here may have been stronger and faster, but he had something they didn't: his human adaptability, his instincts. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of enemy soldiers. Jake's eyes widened as they raised their weapons. Without thinking, his body reacted. He dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blast of energy that flew past him. His heart raced as he rolled to his feet, ready to fight. Kayla was already in motion, using her agility to disarm one of the soldiers with a swift kick. Jake's hand shook as he raised his weapon, but his aim was steady. The first enemy soldier fell, and the others hesitated, giving them a split. "Second of advantage, move," Kayla shouted. Jake didn't hesitate. He followed her lead, darting down the corridor as the enemy regrouped and fired again. They kept moving, taking out anyone who got in their way, until they reached the outer door of the base. The extraction point was just beyond that, but as they reached the door, Jake's blood ran cold. A squad of enemy soldiers was waiting for them, blocking their exit. There was no way around them. This was it. There was no more running. Jake and Kayla had no choice but to face them head-on. The enemy soldiers stepped forward, weapons raised. "You're surrounded," one of them sneered. Jake's hands clenched into fists, his heart racing. He knew that if they didn't act fast, they'd be caught. His mind raced as he scanned the soldiers in front of him. They were powerful, well-trained, but they underestimated him. He wasn't just some weak human. He had come this far for a reason. "We'll fight," Jake said, his voice steady, though his nerves were on edge. "We don't have a choice." Kayla glanced at him, her eyes filled with understanding. Without another word, she moved, and Jake followed her lead. The battle erupted around them, the air charged with tension. Jake fought with everything he had, his movements swift and precise. The enemy soldiers were strong, but Jake was faster. He used everything he had learned. In boot camp, every technique Kayla had shown him. He dodged, struck, and took down opponents with a mix of speed and ingenuity. Kayla moved like a shadow, disarming and disabling the soldiers with grace and precision. Jake followed her lead, learning quickly. He was no longer the weak human who had stumbled into this fight. He was a soldier, fighting for his life and for the mission. Together, they took down the enemy one by one, till the last soldier fell to the ground. Panting and exhausted, Jake stood over the fallen soldiers, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving him feeling drained. But there was no time to rest. They still had to make it out of the base. Kayla wiped the sweat from her brow and nodded toward the door. "The extraction point is just ahead. Let's go."
No.
Jake nodded, his heart still racing as they made their way toward the exit. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, and he knew that more soldiers were on their way. They had to move fast. As they reached the outer door, they saw the transport ship waiting for them in the distance. But before they could make a run for it, Another wave of enemy soldiers appeared, blocking their path. Jake felt his stomach drop. This was the final stretch, and it seemed like the enemy wasn't going to let them escape without a fight. Kayla turned to him, her eyes locked onto his. "This is it, Jake. We can do this. We've come this far. We fight until the end." Jake nodded, determination flooding his body. He wasn't going to let it end like this. He wasn't going to fail. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. With one last surge of energy, he charged forward alongside Kayla, ready to face whatever came next. The chaos of the battle faded into the distance as Jake and Kayla sprinted toward the transport ship, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor of the base. The alarms were deafening, the flashing red lights warning of impending danger, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to slow down. Jake's body was exhausted, every muscle aching from the intense fight. His breath came in short gasps, but there was no time to rest. He glanced over at Kayla, who was running beside him. Her face was set in determination, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. She had been his ally, his guide, through all the hardships of the past few weeks. Together, they had made it this far. Together, they were going to get out. The enemy base was crumbling behind them, a mixture of explosions and gunfire filling the air as the soldiers scrambled to contain the chaos. Jake could hear the sound of more footsteps approaching, but he didn't dare look back. The only thing that mattered was getting to the ship. They reached the landing pad, where the transport ship hovered just above the ground, its engines humming. The ship's hatch was open, and a few of the other soldiers had already boarded, ready to leave. Jake and Kayla didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the ship, ducking as blaster shots flew past them. "We're almost there," Kayla called out, her voice urgent. Jake's heart raced as they neared the ship. He could see the soldiers at the edge of the pad, their weapons raised, but they were too far away to stop them. With one final burst of speed, they reached the hatch and jumped inside. The hatch slammed shut behind them. The ship shot into the air, lifting them away from the enemy base and the chaos below. Jake leaned against the wall, panting heavily, his body still shaking from the fight. Kayla sank into a seat next to him, her face pale but determined. "We did it," she said, her voice quieter now. Jake nodded, his chest still heaving. "No. We did, but it wasn't easy." "No," she agreed, her eyes thoughtful. "But you were amazing out there. You fought like a true soldier." Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said sincerely. "You've taught me more than anyone else here." Kayla gave him a small smile, but there was something in her eyes that told Jake she was thinking about something deeper. "You've got more strength in you than you realize, Jake. It's not just about how fast you can fight or how strong you are. It's about the choices you make when things get tough. You made the right ones." Jake sat back in his seat, thinking about her words. He had come a long way since his first days at the boot camp. He'd been unsure of himself, scared of what the future would bring. But now, after everything he had been through, he was different, stronger, more confident. And he had found something along the way that he hadn't expected: a bond with Kayla, a friendship that had grown into something deeper. As the ship soared through space, heading back toward the home planet, Jake's thoughts turned to Lyra. The king had sent him on this mission to test him, to see if he was worthy of standing beside her. The mission had been a success, but now, Jake wasn't sure what would happen next. He had fought for this chance, fought to prove that he was more than just a human soldier. But was it enough to win the king's approval? Was it enough to prove to Lyra's father that he was worthy of her? Kayla seemed to sense his thoughts. "You did well," she said, her voice gentle. "You've earned your place here, and the king will see that." Jake looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Hope so," he replied. "But even if he doesn't, I'll keep fighting." Kayla smiled softly. "That's the spirit. You've got the heart of a warrior, Jake. That's all anyone needs." As the transport ship hurtled through the stars, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't giving up. He'd proven himself not just to the king, but to himself. And whatever came next, he would face it with the same determination that had brought him this far. The ship eventually entered the atmosphere of the home planet, and Jake could see the familiar landscape below, the mountains and valleys that had once seemed so foreign to him. Now they felt like home. He had earned his place here, and that was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the hatch opened once again. The team disembarked, their mission complete. The soldiers who had once looked down on Jake now nodded at him, their faces acknowledging the respect he had earned. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about who he had become in the process. As Jake stepped off the transport ship, he looked around. At the camp, it was the same, but everything felt different now. He had earned his place here. And when he saw Lyra, he would show her father that he was worthy, not just of her love, but of the respect of every soldier who had once doubted him. Kayla walked beside him, her steps light but sure. "You did it, Jake. You proved everyone wrong." Jake smiled at her, his heart light. "We did it." And with that, Jake knew that his journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning.